All right, hello world. This is CS50 on Twitch. My name is Colton Ogden, and today we're going to do a little bit of game development. So last week we looked at a CTF, which was a capture the flag thing with Nick, which was super cool. We're actually going to do a part 2 of that next week. Nick is currently on spring break right now, and then later on this week we're going to actually take a dive into something completely different, Spark AR, which Connor Doyle, one of CS50's producers, is going to sort of lead. So thanks everybody who's in the chat right now. We have a ton of people already, so shout outs to everybody. I've been chatting with them before break here, or while we had the music sort of coming in. But it feels like it's been a little while since we've done a game from scratch. I think by myself, I might be misremembering. But let me go ahead, and I'm actually going to switch over to my laptop over here, which is, I'm realizing, not plugged in. Holy crap, I didn't even plug my laptop in. Whoops. While we get that set up, I want to shout out actually my dad, who suggested that we do today's stream. So I think he was considering potentially making a slot machine himself in JavaScript. Here we go. My laptop is all set up. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. And so he was like, how would you implement a slot machine in raw JavaScript? And I'm not as familiar with JavaScript as I am with Lua and LÖVE and stuff like that. But I sort of have the mental model as a game programmer, what I would do to get it working in JavaScript, and I think I'd have to find an API or something to get it working. I'd probably use something like Phaser if I were doing it in JavaScript, or maybe even with raw JavaScript I could figure out ways to do it with divs and whatnot, and images, and maybe jQuery, which we're going to do a stream on actually, I think next week, next Friday. But we're going to implement it in LÖVE, which is a framework that I am more familiar with, to see how you would use it in the context of something like a proper 2D game development framework. And Asli T, who's popped up in the chat, says hello everybody. And this rule points out that last time we did a game was actually on my birthday. Was that Cookie Clicker, if I'm not mistaken? I think it might have been. So I'm going to pull up actually, let me go ahead and I'm going to just switch my screen off here for just a second, because I realized that I need to grab the images off of my email. So give me 1 second here. So yeah, my dad suggested that, let's do a slot machine example, because he's learning how to do JavaScript. He wanted to do a slot machine. And actually, he was kind enough to put together the artwork for today's game. So shout outs to my dad for doing that as well. I'm going to pull those up here. And whoops, I am just messing up all over the place here. While we get that up and running, how's everyone's day? Let me know what people are doing and what they're working on, and what they're interested in seeing in the future for this show. Binary Warrior says, isn't jQuery kind of dying out at this point? And to a degree, I would say probably, yeah. It's definitely not quite as used as it used to be. But the reality is that it's still used in a lot of applications. It's still very much used in legacy. And things like Bootstrap, which are very much in use now, still use jQuery underneath the hood and as their as an active layer for interfacing with the more dynamic widgets within the library, within the framework. So I would say kind of probably it's dying out, especially with things like React, taking care of a lot of the things that jQuery was really useful for in the past, and things like the fetch API, which jQuery was really used for a lot of Ajax-related stuff, but it's still very much used, still, and probably will be used for a long time. But I think the transition that I'm sort of feeling is that people are moving towards a less jQuery-focused, certainly at least a less jQuery-focused approach to the front end. It used to be a major component of front-end applications, and now React has sort of supplanted that. React, Vue, Angular, those types of frameworks. Amchora asks, what is a slot machine? And actually, that's a great point. We're going to bring up exactly what that is. And I have just finished downloading the images. I think it's now, I can bring my computer back onto the screen like that. Boom. And then I'm going to just go ahead down to my downloads, grab my pings folder here, and drag that over to a new folder, jharvard dev streams slot machine. So here I'm just going to make a new folder. We're going to bootstrap this application the way we do with all of our LÖVE2D applications with a new folder. And I'm going to show you the tools that we're using here in just a second as well. I just want to make sure all the files are in the right location. So slot machine, graphics. Let's go ahead and bring those PNG files over here like that. And then now let's go ahead and talk about what a slot machine is, because that's actually a valid point. So a slot machine is something like this. You might be familiar. If you've seen a casino or if you've been to Las Vegas, if you've played any games that might have a gambling sort of aspect to them, a slot machine is essentially a box that you put a coin inside of, or however amount of money that the machine takes. Might take chips, might take paper, might take coins. And I think traditionally you used a lever to actually get it to work. In this day and age, most slot machines are just digital, so you press it. Well, they're not purely digital, but they're typically mostly digitized in that you press a button, the button will fire off some bit of code that will either scroll virtual wheels or physical wheels, these three things here. And actually, maybe we can see like a slot machine example on YouTube or something. So we go to a slot machine example. So something like this, where you have you press a button, and I'm just going to make sure. I don't know what the audio is going to sound like. Where do we have the actual gameplay of it? So you have. It's hard to tell in this example. You would think that there would be like a nice, really easy, like, oh, here's what a slot machine is. Let's see. Does this work? OK, so let's get it to go. The problem is that slot machines these days are so complicated. They have like a billion. There's a perfect example right there. So you press the button. You have all these rows of things that move, vertically, right? You have different rows. And if you match any row in your slot machine, and in today's example, we're just using a single row. But if all these symbols are the same, you'll get a different reward depending on how rare that symbol is in your pool of symbols. For example, you might have a selection of different types of fruit, which is what we're actually going to be doing today. And maybe you want oranges to be really rare. Maybe you only want one orange in every row of symbols. But maybe you want pineapples to be more common. So maybe you have 2 pineapples in your row. So maybe you have pineapple, orange, pineapple. So therefore, you're twice as likely to get your wheel to end in a pineapple as it is to end in an orange. And then you could do the same thing by maybe adding 3 apples to your row. So you have apple, pineapple, apple, banana, apple, orange, or whatever the ratio is. So more apples equals more chance to get apples, which means that you get less reward for matching a row of apples versus matching a row of pineapples versus matching a row of oranges, or whatever you want to, however you want to structure your reward system. But this is how casinos typically look with their slot machines now. They're very complicated. They have a lot of rows. But the sort of, I guess, more iconic illustration of what a slot machine looks like, how I think they traditionally looked before Vegas blew up and there's a million different slot machine vendors, is something that looks like this. This is the archetypal sort of iconic slot machine. And actually, it's very iconic for there to be 7s as sort of the jackpot symbol. So a jackpot just means you get a ton of money when you match all 3 7s, right? It's way more than any of the other rewards that you get. Today, we're actually going to be using not 7, but more appropriately 50. That'll be our jackpot number. And we may not have time necessarily to get into actually implementing I mean, it'd be fairly easy to implement a jackpot. It's a little bit tougher to test because it's all luck-based and it's statistical, right? But the code behind actually detecting matches and choosing what's more rare versus other things, that's all stuff that we'll have time to cover today. So this is what a slot machine looks like, and this is sort of how we're going to be going around implementing it. Now there was a graphic actually that I had set up in advance. So actually I'm going to cut my slide up off of, I'm going to get my computer feed off of there for just a second and grab some images that are sort of prefabricated. In the meantime, I'll answer some chat questions. Bevignite asks, is this based on total probability concept? I'm not entirely sure. I have to maybe research or Google what that means. Slot machines are based on probability, so you have, by weighting which symbols are in each pool, in each sort of reel on your machine, you do therefore influence the odds of whether you get, the sevens will usually be very rare. There'll only be 1 7 per row, and there'll usually be 20 symbols per slot. So you'll have 20, 20, and 20 all vertically oriented, or in a wheel you can sort of think of. And by having 1 7 versus having maybe 5 apples or 4 oranges, you make the 7 very rare to match, especially if you multiply that factor by 3, going 1 7 out of 20 times 1 7 out of 20 times 1 7 out of 20. And I think that adds up to being whatever 20 to the third power is, which I think is, what would that be? 1 over 80,000, something like that, or 1 over 8,000. That's your chance of getting a jackpot, I think, in that model. Although the numbers might be slightly different because you're, especially when you start getting into choosing random offsets after you end up actually slowing down the wheel. We'll see how that all works out. Oh yeah, nice. Asley kindly plugged a lever-based slot machine there in the chat. So I'm on a separate account here. I'm grabbing all of the images that I put together in advance. I'm just going to grab that, go down here. So apologize. Just give me 1 second. If anybody's been working on their own games, definitely let me know, because I'm very curious if anybody's doing their own game development. Like I said, I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks, 3 weeks maybe, since we've done any game development streams. With microprocessors now ubiquitous, the computers inside modern slot machines allow manufacturers to assign a different probability to every symbol on every reel. Right, yeah. Yeah, because you can get fancy with your algorithm and shift the influence it such that it'll end up spinning the wheel in a certain way and waiting, where it ends after it ends up spinning. That's certainly possible to do. Ours is going to be a little bit more of a naive random approach, which I think does go down to what Aditya was saying of an 8,000, a 1 in 8,000 probability for the 3 sevens actually aligning. So yeah, you absolutely can flub the numbers however you want. And I wouldn't doubt that casinos actually end up doing this in practice quite a bit. Let me just make sure that I have this all set in the right place. Okay. 1 sec, just about done here. Just need to copy these over. This will save us a little bit of time on stream, rather than cutting all these images, finding the images, etc. We can get sort of right into the coding, which I think will save us some time. All right, I'm going to do that. I think we're just about ready. Just switching users one more time. Oh, and thank you also to Mattley333, Harakarisa, and Raleo for the follows. Much appreciated. We'll get to some very interesting visual stuff here in just a second. I recently made a very basic version of Brick Breaker in JavaScript, says Binary Warrior 76. That's awesome. The game course that I teach teaches how to make Brick Breaker, or Breakout as it's called. It's a very good game that you can really actually take in a lot of directions. In the game course, we end up using procedural generation, well, sort of procedural generation, randomization of the game grid for a more interesting layout to the game, so that you don't get the same grid every single time. And I think you can go on GitHub to see it if you're interested. It would be the, or actually you can go to the games course, cs50.edx.org/games. If I plug that here, which I might be able to do that, cs50.edx.org/games. Go to that games course. We teach Brick Breaker as the assignment 2. Is that? Yeah, 012, assignment 2. And Griffos, thank you very much for the follow. All right, cool. I think we're all set. Let me just confirm. The images are here. Awesome, cool. So I'm going to switch my computer back on here. So these are the images that my dad put together. They look a little bit blurry because Mac uses filtering when you're previewing images. But I went, and essentially the pings folder here has all these images, but at their native size, so 200 by 200. So notice that they're slightly, it might be hard to see on your end, but they're slightly higher resolution. But for a 720p demonstration, the 200 by 200 size is a little bit large. So these are shrunk down to 64 by 64, which is actually a fairly common size for textures, actually, especially when powers of 2 textures were more important for OpenGL back in the day. Not something that you usually have to worry about too much now, but it was an optimization for the OpenGL framework where things had to be a power of 2. Let me just show you what these images look like. So here's the slot machine that we're going to be using. So this is just an image that I found online, actually. I might be able to find it again. So if I, oops, I need to quit Spotify here. If I go over to Google Images, so let's say images, slot machine. I think I did slot machine free. Did I do that? Oh, you know what I might have done? Free slot machine image. And shoot, offhand, now I'm actually not remembering where I found it. I found it yesterday when I was exploring. Let's see. Yeah, I'll try and find it in the future. But it was essentially a royalty-free slot machine picture. That was just an illustration. But the one difference that I made was that you'll notice here there's these 3 sort of holes. And this will be included in the GitHub repo when I push the GitHub repo. But there were these 3 holes here that were actually filled in with a static image. They had 7s in them. So what I did was I actually, I can open this up in Asprite to illustrate this. I opened this up in Asprite, and then I just cut these out. You can notice that you can see the background, because what we're going to do is we're going to sort of visually scroll sort of some symbols, right? But we want them visible only. We don't want to, obviously, for them to be visible outside of this sort of window of the slot machine. We want to layer. We want to sort of have it look as if they're inside the slot machine. And so you do this by drawing the wheels, or the slots, and then you draw the slot machine box sort of over on top of that. And so that's why we needed these to be transparent. So now we can draw whatever we want behind these, and it'll render it and give us the illusion of it actually being a slot machine, which is pretty cool. And then I resized it appropriately. I made sure that these were all just as large as they needed to be visible within those individual slots. So right now, it's not important for them to be powers of 2. No, right now, most any 2D game development framework, you can have any arbitrarily sized texture, and it'll work great. I think for Unity in certain contexts, having a power of 2 texture does give you some sort of optimization. I think this applies to certain other domains across frameworks. And I think for 3D engines, you get into more of this being a thing. And that's why you'll see a lot of textures for game engines are usually like 4096 by 4096 or 2048 by 2048, because there are territories, domains where this is important. JP guy says, so you'd only need to render 2 images per column? Yeah, effectively, or 3. If I wanted to render for example, here, and we'll see this sort of. If I have this slot machine here, and let's say I have my image here sort of in the middle, right here, I'm going to want to also render slightly the image above it and the image below it. So we're actually rendering only 3 images visible behind it. And actually, the way we're structuring everything, we're going to have every single image in our sort of invisible wheel rendered in a vertical column and then just scrolling upwards. And that'll give us the illusion of a slot machine's reels being scrolled like an actual wheel. But we can say, if the image's texture is higher than this point on the y-axis or lower than this point on the y-axis, just don't render it. Even though we're sort of scrolling them invisibly and we're showing them, we can tell it not to render them, and it'll just make it look as if they're not there, right? Even though they're rendering, even though they're moving their Y position and scrolling indefinitely and looping around, which we'll take a look at, using a simple if statement, we can just make it not render what we don't care about seeing, and it's super easy. So let's go ahead and actually start this project and get coding a little bit. Making sure that I'm not missing anything, which it doesn't look like it. OK, cool. So we have our project here. I'm just going to go ahead and drag it over to VS Code. And for those folks who are unfamiliar with what we're doing, I typically implement 2D games in LÖVE 2D. So this is where you can get LÖVE 2D, which is an awesome 2D game development framework. It's totally free, exports to all major operating systems, exports to mobile, and it has a library that you can even use to get it to work on the web. But löve2d.org, get the version for your operating system here. There are other versions for older versions of it if you want. My games course uses 0.10.2 if you're following along with the games course. And you can get all of the versions for all of your operating systems here. And LÖVE2D has an awesome set of documentation. You go to the wiki. You can get started here. If you go to the Getting Started link, you'll get some instructions on how to get it up and running on your operating system, how to get a very basic game implemented, some nice handy shortcuts depending on which operating system you're using to get your game working really fast. So you don't have to have a very tedious workflow. And it looks like my Visual Studio Code updated, so I'm curious to see if the Lua syntax stuff got fixed from last time, which last time was kind of a pain. I use Visual Studio Code because VS Code actually has a really cool extension. This Pixelbyte Studios LÖVE2D support plugin. If you get this and you're using VS Code, if you're on a Mac, you can just hit Command L, and that'll actually run your game immediately if you have LÖVE2D installed in the right location. If you're on Windows, it's the same thing, but it's Alt L. So it just saves a lot of time. It's super handy. I don't really like clicking and dragging to an exe or an app. I don't like going to my terminal necessarily. And per the instructions on the LÖVE2D forms, for example, I can go LÖVE dot, and that will do the same thing. Although right now I don't have a LÖVE application. I can just type LÖVE, for example, and that will pull up. This is what LÖVE will look like if you're running it without a game, for example. But in the instructions, there's a way for you to alias at the command line the word LÖVE to point to where you have it installed on a Mac. And there's certain other ways you can get this done on Linux and Windows. Actually, on Linux, it's very similar. On Windows, it's a little bit more complicated. But I don't like doing any of that necessarily. If I'm quickly developing, I like to just hit Command L or Alt L. It's much easier for me. So if anybody is interested in doing that, super easy to do. I highly recommend that. And actually, that's what we do for the games course too, for example. Let's go ahead now. And why can't I create a new file? Interesting. Let's try that one more time. Wouldn't actually let me create a new file in my project here. OK. Interesting. Let's save that as main or main.lua. Well, let me create a new file now. Oh, interesting. So I just learned now that if you don't have a source file in your project, when it's loaded, I guess it doesn't recognize that it's a source repository and won't let you add new files. So if you ever experience that, just make sure you have a new file. You can hit Command N to bring up a new file, et cetera, et cetera. So main.lua is the file that you need in a LÖVE2D application in order to get it to work. That's sort of the main entry point of suggestion, or the main entry point of execution for LÖVE, the binary. It's sort of like in C where you have int main void, or in Python if you have underscore underscore main. Same kind of idea. LÖVE just expects this file to exist. And quick suggestion for later on, if it's possible to change messages to star star star, would it not be better to disable printing that message on the screen altogether? That way the chat screen doesn't get clogged with a bunch of people saying star star star. Interesting. I'll take a look and see if the widget lets us do that. I'm actually not familiar with whether that's a possibility. I'm guessing it probably is. I actually didn't know prior to a few streams back that the star 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 thing was even a thing, to be honest. So it's a cool feature. I'll take a look at the widget and see if it's possible. But back to main.lua, this is sort of where your entry point is found by LÖVE2D and where you can actually start the application. So I'm going to write just a few simple functions here that LÖVE2D expects to exist in order to get things running appropriately. So love.load, love.update, and love.draw. And load just happens once at the start of your program. Update happens every frame. So remember, basically games are a sequence of frames, usually 60 frames a second, just an image that gets displayed one after the other, depending on how fast your computer is and how intensive the game is. Excuse me. And then draw, it does the same, it runs the same speed as update. It happens every frame. But this is used more for allocating drawing stuff. and it doesn't get this dt passed into it by LÖVE, which is just delta time, how much time has elapsed since the last frame. So actually, I'm going to, just for cleanliness, I'm going to say slot machine game. This is how you do a code or a comment block in Lua. And if you're looking at this and confused as to the language is Lua. So the library is LÖVE, but the language is Lua. So Lua is a game. It's a programming language used all over the place in the games industry. You see it typically used as an interface for compiled C++ game engines, C or C++ game engines. But LÖVE2D does sort of the same thing. It itself is written in C++, compiled down to the program you download onto your computer, and then you write these Lua files, which LÖVE2D loads and then runs those. It basically has the functions implemented in C++ that get called by your Lua code. So it runs really, really fast, but it allows you to program in a dynamic scripting language as opposed to having to program in C++ or C or something where you have to compile it down, which can be kind of tedious and yeah, not as fast for development. LÖVE2D is a great environment for prototyping and for programming sort of simpler stuff. So these are your core functions that you start off with. I'm just going to say love.window.setMode. And let's go ahead and say I'm going to create a constants file. I'm going to make this file so that I have a dedicated location for all of the constants, all of the variables that shouldn't change, all the pieces of information that are going to stay the same, stay constant throughout my application. I'm going to say window width is going to be equal to 1280. Window height is going to be equal to 720. I'm going to set that in my constants.lua. And then up here, I can say require constants.lua. And now I can say window width and window height. If I run this, require constants, not constants.lua. Sorry, Lua assumes, or LÖVE2D/Lua assume that everything that you require is a Lua file. So by saying constants.lua, the dot is actually a folder. It actually looks into a folder. So in this case, it would look into the constants folder for a Lua.lua file, which is not what we wanted at all. So don't use dots in your require statements. Use only the name of the file. In this case, constants gets mapped to this constants.lua file. So I'm going to do that. So now we have our window. It's the full width of the screen, 720p, 1280 by 720. This is going to work great. What I want to do now, just as a sanity check, I want to actually draw the slot machine on the screen. Just the raw slot machine, none of the wheels or anything like that. So I'm going to do that. And in order to do that, what I typically like to do is I'll create a dependencies file. So I'll say dependencies.lua. And in here, I'm just going to create a textures table. I'm going to create an index. So this is how you do tables in Lua, or in Python you might know them as dictionaries. In JavaScript you might know them as objects. Essentially just a way to associate keys with values. So in this case I want to associate the keys slot machine to an image. love.graphics.newImage. I'm going to command B that. And this is going to be graphics/slotmachine.png. And so now I have notice that I have this lowercase g. I have a global textures table, G textures. That's why I prefaced it with the G, the lowercase g. I have this table that I can access anywhere in my application. And so what I can do there is now, even though this is in my dependencies.lua file, in main I can say require dependencies. And I can say in my draw function, remember this is where you should do all of your rendering, all of your drawing. I can say love.graphics.draw G textures, right? Because now we have access to G textures. It's global. And I'll say slot machine. That's the key into which our value was that new image object we created, right? And then we'll say we'll just let it draw actually at the regular location. So if I refresh this, we do indeed now see our slot machine getting rendered to the screen. And I sort of a priori made sure that this would fit well on 720p because I was doing a little bit of experimentation last night. I wanted to make sure we sort of had a roadmap that was pretty clear. And the default image for this was really big, and it wouldn't have worked in the default resolution that I normally use or it wouldn't have worked at 720p, which is what we usually stream at, or what I use my laptop at for streaming purposes because everything's nice and big. Binary Warrior says, have you tried the material theme for VS Code? It looks much better than the default, in my opinion. I'm not sure. Let's try it out, actually. And thanks also to Dragosh3003, Kate Tegel, and Dive Shatam, or Dives Hatam. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. I'm going to quit this. And actually, how do you get... I very rarely ever change my theme on here. Appearance. How do you change the theme on here? Because I don't think I've ever... I changed the theme one time on my main account. And after that, I haven't actually changed it. How would it be in appearance? This doesn't look like it does that. Maybe preferences, right? Settings. Oh, color theme. Color theme. Do I have to install material? Let's see. Material. This one. Install. It's very, let's say, darker. Like that. And then get rid of this. It's one thing that I don't like is that it's the 720p. Everything is so well. It's also my amplification. It's a little bit, or my magnification. Everything's a little bit. It gets very cluttered very quickly if all the windows start popping up. But I think this is this is pretty good. We'll use it for today. Oh, pale night high contrast. Is that a different material theme? Let's see that. If I go back to preferences, color theme, pale night high contrast. Let's try that. Oof. I'm going to be honest with you, Binary Warrior. I'm not a huge fan of the blue. I'm not a huge fan of the blue. I don't mind the other theme though. So I'll use the other one. So that would be the material theme. Darker high contrast? We'll use this one. We'll use this one. I'm happy to use this one. And yeah, Adam, it looks a bit dim. I agree. I'm not a huge fan of the. I wasn't a huge fan of the blue. But do folks like this theme, the material high contrast? I'm digging this one. I'm happy to use this one. In the meantime, let's go ahead and actually add the ability to terminate the application with a key press, because I don't like having to command or press escape. Or I don't like having to command Q. I would much rather be able to press escape and quit the game. So this love.keyPressed function takes in a key. It gets passed a key by Lua, or by Lua and Love2D. And this key is something that you can check for and then do stuff. So I can basically say, Binary Warrior, so everyone has their own preference. Yeah, everyone does have their own preference. And it's not meant to be a slight on you for having a preference for that. I think this is a very subjective thing. I personally don't like the themes that are a little bit not contrasty enough and are I don't typically like non-black backgrounds, but that's just me. Some people like lighter themes, some people like blue, some people like brown text editor themes. Everyone has their own preference. I think it's more important for the stream that we have something that's readable, and that's really the only concern. Aside from that, I don't think it matters too much. But I do like this theme, so thank you for suggesting this theme. We'll use it for today's stream. Key pressed key. Let's go ahead now and say if key is equal to escape, then... Oh, nice. They fixed the indentation. This is great. OK. So that was excellent. Last week, or 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, however long it was, the version of VS Code that I had was messed up with the indentation. So VS Code's fixed it. So shout out to VS Code for correcting that. But you can see here, I'm basically checking this key that gets passed in here. And so basically what I want to have happen is if I hit escape, I want to quit the game. I don't want to have to hit Command Q or click the red X or whatnot, depending on your operating system. So if key is equal to escape, love.event.quit. And you've probably seen this before if you paid attention to prior streams, but this is just a way of quitting an application in code using Lua, using Love2D. So something that lets you do it without necessarily needing to manually quit, manually Command Q, or go to your Alt F4 or whatnot. And this is something that you could implement in a menu system. For example, if you were implementing a menu in your game and you want the user to go down to quit game and then have that quit the game, same thing, same exact idea. Love.event.quit. Love.quit. So now it's cool. If I hit that, I can hit escape. Notice that I'm just using Command L to bring my application up, which is super nice, super convenient. I don't have to click and drag to an exe. I don't have to go to my terminal. I can just use a shortcut in VS Code. So highly recommend this ecosystem for Lua and Love 2D development. Andre says hello. Hi, Colton. Hi, everyone. Good to see you, Andre. Thanks for joining us today on our slot machine stream. So let's go ahead now, and actually I want to draw the slot machine right in the center. It's kind of shifted off to the left, but I want this to be in the center of the board. So what I can do is I can say, let's say local, and we'll say, actually this will be a constant, right? So we'll make this a constant. So I'll say slot padding is equal to window width minus, and this is actually where we're going to need, this is where we're going to need to figure out how wide our slot machine is, actually. And so now I'm realizing it doesn't need to be a constant. This should actually be a regular variable. So we'll say local slot padding. This slot padding is going to be the amount of padding that we add to our, when we draw the slot machine on the screen. So you can, normally right now what we're doing is we're just drawing it. We're just saying love.graphics.draw the texture, and that'll assume everything gets drawn by its top left corner, its 0, 0 mark. Every 2D object has a XY coordinate, if you're familiar with a coordinate system from geometry. Everything has to be drawn somewhere in 2D, so it needs an X and a Y value. And so if you don't pass in an X and a Y value here, it'll just assume 0, 0, which is in the 2D coordinate space, the top left. We can pass in an X and a Y. I can say, for example, 100, 100, and this will basically now notice that it's shifted to the right, the bottom right a little bit, right? This is the effect of sort of offsetting everything from the top left, going down 100 pixels, and then going right 100 pixels. It has that same effect. But I want to essentially calculate how much we should move it to the right based on how wide it is. And what we can do is we can say the padding for that is going to be the window width minus, and what we'll do is we'll say g textures at slot machine get width. Every texture has this function that you can call on it with this colon called get width. And colon is usually how you access an object's functions as opposed to dot. Dot is usually how you would access not like an individual object's functions, but more like a class, something like that. Something that doesn't have, something that cannot spawn multiple children, because basically colon passes in this parameter called self, which allows you to use sort of an object-oriented programming style with Lua. And that's what you get with the colon operator. You can sort of assume that colon is how you would access an object's fields or methods, sort of how you would do it in Java, and dot would be how you would access static methods or static fields in Java or C++. Same sort of idea. And then we can divide this by 2, and this is essentially what this is essentially doing is it's saying get the whole window width, and then whatever the difference is between the window width and the slot machine, which will be however much total padding there is, divide that by 2, and if we draw this now at the slot padding, and we'll still assume it at 0 for the Y value, this will end up drawing our slot machine exactly in the middle of the screen. I should go study for my exam tomorrow. See you in the next stream. Awesome. Thanks, Binary Warrior, for tuning in. Best of luck with whatever you're studying for. Sorry if this is too off topic, says Asley, but what is under the hood of love.event.quit? Interesting. I'm not sure. So let's say love.event.quit. Let's go over to here. And there is some source code. So what I'm guessing is this probably sets a variable called quit, called an integer underneath the hood. And there's an infinite loop in Love2D that's basically saying while not quit, right? So whatever that variable is. And as soon as you set it to false, it'll just terminate your game loop, and then application just ends. But you can visit the source code. So if we were to go to Love2D source code, I think it's on Bitbucket, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, root/love. Root is the user under which it exists. And let's see if we go over to source here. I ended up having to look into the source code for some, I forget exactly what it was. I think I was looking to see why you needed to pass in the dimensions of a texture to the quad constructor, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember offhand why the exact reason was. But if we go to, let's see, go to modules and go to event, and is it an event.cpp maybe? So is there a quit function here? So if I search for quit, no, it's not here. OK. Let's maybe go over to the header. Is it in the header file? No. Let's see. Wrap event CPP. It's probably this, w quit. So it looks like it passes in a Boolean to, I'm not sure, oh, to the Lua state. OK. Push Boolean true. Yeah, this is dealing with the Lua virtual machine and essentially pushing a variable to it from C or C++. And I'm not entirely sure. Oh, OK, so it constructs a new message called quit. OK. Oh, and then it pushes that quit message onto the stack. And I'm assuming that in the infinite loop that runs underneath the hood for LÖVE2D, that it's essentially looking in the state for this quit message. So there's probably so it's using this sort of broadcast model where you push messages onto a stack, and then there's listeners that listen for these messages and perform functionality. And there's probably a function that's initialized somewhere else that says on quit. So whenever we see the message quit, terminate the infinite loop that surrounds the game engine. And there might be a simple, underneath all of that, there might be a simple integer or a simple Boolean that the while loop is checking for. And if that Boolean gets set to false, well then everything just terminates at that point. That while loop that's responsible for the entire application's existence just stops running. And that has the effect of everything terminating. And there might be some cleanup associated with that. There might be a separate sort of cleanup function that takes place after that while loop is terminated. So after the while loop, going underneath all of that, there's another sort of block of code that says clean up all memory, do all this, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of that is the proper sort of exit point for the application. This is how you would more intelligently engineer something like this, because you don't want to just quit something immediately and sort of leak memory, right? Because you have to free all the memory that you allocate. Yeah, Andre was saying there must be an event listener. Yeah, it sounds like there is an event listener. Unity source code is not publicly available. That's correct. They do have licenses where they make it available to companies that pay a certain fee for it, but it's not open source. Event listeners were what we use to trigger events like start music, etc. in our project. Yeah, event listeners are key, and actually we're not going to use event listeners here actually today. We're approaching that territory with sort of callback functions. We're going to be using tweens and timer.after, timer.tween, which we do use in the games course, has the same sort of effect. And thanks to Wayne955 for letting Hell for Sunny know about the tools we're using, Visual Studio Code, LÖVE2D, also the Pixel Byte Studios LÖVE2D plugin. Super important if you want to be able to execute your code very quickly from Visual Studio Code. Super nice. I use it and I love it. Super amazing. All right, so we've covered now getting the slot machine rendering on the screen and centered, right? Everything's good. We have images loading. I'm going to go ahead into my dependencies. I want to be able to start drawing the slot reels. I want to actually have 3 separate reels of slots that scroll, right? They get rendered behind the slot machine facade. And to do that, I need to have the actual icons, right? Shoutouts again to my dad for kindly making these image files for me, because sure as hell know that I would not have been able to do a good job of making these from scratch myself. I am not an artist. So what we can do is I can say, well, first of all, local icons is going to be equal to, and we have all of our icons here, sort of in this directory. So I have 50 apple banana. So we'll say 50 apple banana, cherry lemon orange. And I also saw pineapple. Right, I'm making a list of strings which we're going to be able to use to dynamically construct our textures table. So pineapple and then strawberry. And I think that's it, actually. So I have a list of strings here. That's all this is. We're using a table as an array here. So you can use tables as dictionaries / objects, and you can also use them as arrays. They function similarly. They're very flexible in that regard. Actually, very similar to how PHP even does its own array data structure. And so what I can do now is I can say for every key and value in the pairs of icons, do, and then g textures at value. So this will take each individual string equals love dot graphics dot new image at graphics / and then dot dot for string concatenation. This is Lua's string concatenation operator. And then v for the name of, whether it's 50, apple, banana, etc. Concatenate again dot JPEG in this case. And now I have a list of or a table with a collection of all of our icons. And actually, I'm going to make this global by saying g icons. So now I can reference these icons, this list of strings, anywhere in my application, which I'm actually not sure if I need now that I think back on. I sort of did a trial run of this. I don't think you necessarily need it, but yeah. To answer Adam's question, yeah, my dad made the images from scratch, correct, yeah. If he's saying that is great. Yeah, Andre, it's only the top tier. Yeah, unfortunately, Unity's license for that is a little bit less than generous, but Unity as a platform I think is incredibly generous, so I'm not apt to criticize them too much for that practice. I think it relatively makes sense. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Unreal source code is open source. Don't quote me on that, but somebody, when I taught the games course last spring, somebody brought this up, and I thought I remembered researching it and finding out that it was true, that Unreal Engine does have some sort of open source license, but I don't know. OK, let's go ahead and now let's just test. Let's just sanity check. Let's make sure that all of these images are rendering. Let's make a loop here. So I'm going to say for, let's say actually for key value in pairs of g icons, do love.graphics.draw, and then g textures at v at, well, k will be a number in this case. Will it? No, it won't actually. Yes, it will. Yes, it will be a number because we're using it as an array. This is the nice thing about using tables in Lua, is that if you just use them as arrays, they get implicitly indexed by numbers. So they do work like arrays if you don't use them like dictionaries or objects. They do get that implicit functionality, which is super nice. So I'm going to say, since k will be numeric, I'm going to just draw these sort of in a line. I'm going to say k times 64 and 0. So this should work. Fingers crossed. Nope. Table expected got nil. Dependencies, line 8. G icons, is that not available? G icons in pairs of G icons. We are requiring dependencies. G icons is a global table. Oh, here, this is what the reason is, right? I forgot to change this to G icons after I edited it. Cool. So there are our textures, right? Super nice. And is that the right size? Are those the right sizes? I think those are. I did all this in advance, and I'm pretty sure everything is pretty appropriately sized. I have all the numbers here. I ended up figuring out the offsets of the texture to sort of figure out where exactly things should belong. So this should save us a little bit of time. But that looks like all of the images that we do care about. They're all rendering. They all look pretty good. They're all different colors. It's a very colorful slot machine. And then here's even our 50, which is very appropriate. And that'll be our, sort of our jackpot. Not 7, but 50. You know, higher number, higher jackpot. So let's go ahead and make our actual reels. Now we're not, I don't think, going to make this a super super engineered application where we have a bunch of classes all over the place doing a bunch of stuff. I think we're going to use mostly just raw tables for most of what's going on today in this stream. So in here, I'm actually just going to say, after slot padding, let's go ahead and make our slot reals. So we'll say slot reals is going to be equal to a table, and this is going to be a table of tables, right? So this is going to be basically an array of 3 tables. These 3 tables are going to store the vertical sort of slot reels, all of the images in a sort of fake wheel. We don't really have a wheel because we're in 2D, but we can make it look like a wheel. We can have a vertical sort of scrolling bar of images, and then what we can have happen is when the images get above a certain point, we'll just take whatever the top image is, wrap it around to the bottom, and then keep going, and just keep doing this indefinitely, right? And this will just give us the illusion of having a wheel for each of our slot reels. Just this infinite, sort of like this odometer type mechanism. And that's essentially what we're going to have happen. The Go.engine is completely open source, says Waney955. If you're going to need access to the source code, you're probably going to be doing things that the enterprise license is not going to be that big a share of the development cost. Probably true. Probably true. I know personally I wouldn't mind digging in sometimes to find out how things are done, but I think the source code of being open to Unity in the Unity ecosystem is probably a more power user-oriented decision. So it does make sense. I do understand. And yeah, Andre's saying Unreal is not strictly open source. Available on GitHub, but bound by the license. Oh, I see. Got it. So available, publicly available, not open source in the typical sense of the word, in the sense of the term. Like a mechanical engine, says Budanog. Yeah, kind of like, I could see, yeah, mechanical engine, where you have the odometer sort of scrolling. So these are our reels. We're going to store, they're going to be just arrays of textures, of icons, sort of. And let's fill them out. Let's test this out. Let's make sure this works. So in my loved load, I can say for I is equal to 1 until 3. So this is how you do for loops inside of Lua. Populate each slot reel with icons, right? And let's say let's figure out the weight that we want everything to be in. So there's going to be a weight to everything. This is how slot machines work probabilistically. You don't put the same icon in the same number of times in each reel, or everything has an equal probability of coming up, right? You make the jackpot really rare, and then you start making things progressively more and more common by adding more of those symbols into the tables. So Bavik says, are you using material dark theme now? For this stream, I don't know if I'll use it indefinitely, but I think it's fun to sort of experiment with new themes. Why not? I don't mind it. It looks pretty nice. I wasn't a huge fan of the other version of it, which was blue, just because it wasn't contrasty enough. I don't think it looks particularly good on camera, but I like this theme. I think it's good. It's close to what I like. 1 to 3 icons in every row. Yeah, it's going to be kind of how it is. Yeah, 1 to 3 icon. Well, it's going to be 1 to 3 for every row. So this is what happens. We go first row, second row, third row, and then within the row, we're basically going to say for every key value inside of pairs of slot icons, this is where we generate entire slot reel for this column, right? We can say table.insert into slot reels I, a table structure. This is basically where we're going to represent the idea of an individual icon. And it's going to get an icon, which is going to be equal to V. And it's going to get an X, which is going to be equal to, and this is where I sort of have hard-coded numbers. It looks like I did slot margin plus 218 plus 62 times I minus 1. And what this does is it gives me an offset. I say slot margin. I move them over to slot margin. I then offset them over, depending on which eye we're at, by 62 pixels. So I shift them over by 62 pixels. So they're a little bit nudged together to fit within the reel. Alternatively, I could have just made the images slightly smaller and then offset it by the image width. But in this case, this is what I came up with. And I liked the cleanliness of having 64 by 64. Also, making them too much smaller would degrade the image quality. So it's kind of a trade-off at that point. Alternatively, it could have made the game larger, and then therefore I wouldn't need to make the images smaller, but it would have looked kind of challenging on stream. But anyway, Andre says I have to go. I'll catch up later on YouTube. Take care. Thanks for tuning in, Andre. Much appreciated. And then Buddha says this theme is good for the eyes. I am using it. Well, good. I'm glad that other folks find the theme enjoyable. So this is where we're assigning the x for this particular icon. So based on the row, we're essentially shifting it over by slot margin plus 218, which this shouldn't be a constant, really. This should be some value called like inner slot offset. And then I'll go over to constant, and I'll say inner slot offset is equal to 218, right? You usually want to avoid magic numbers, and then we could even do it for here. I can say slot icon offset, right? So we'll say slot icon offset is equal to 62. So this is a more flexible and clean way of looking at this problem. Avoid using hard-coded numbers whenever possible. Just use constants, because therefore if you ever want to duplicate this or change it or want to figure out where to change the variable and don't want to grep through your entire source base, you can sort of ascertain that it's in constants.lua and figure things out much faster and streamline your development process. And save yourself headaches. And then y is going to be equal to, it looks like I did 238. So this is another magic number, right? So 238 is going to be inner. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to say horizontal slot offset and vertical slot offset. And 238 is the number that I found to work for this. And we'll say vertical slot offset. And this will be horizontal slot offset. So vertical slot offset. And then I ended up making that also a function of k. Right? Because these were actually stacking vertically. So this is depending on this k value, which is going to be a number. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here we can say k minus 1, and then multiply that by 64. And in this case, we actually do care that they're 64 apart, because then you can see their borders adjacent to one another, and it looks more visually interesting. The nesting together of 62 pixels for the slot icon offset is more for the fact that the slot machine's a little bit. I should have maybe made the slot machine a little larger, but just to avoid, I guess. Yeah, I guess I probably should have just done that. Anyway, that'll take too much time, so we won't worry about that. 64, I can make that icon size and bring that over to constants, and I can say icon size is equal to 64. And actually, this I can even do something like this. I can say icon size, and then make slot icon offset equal to icon size minus 2, right? So now it's a function of icon size. So we can just change the icon size, and this should, I mean, it might not be totally great if we scale up to a factor that's pretty large, but in this case, it's just a little bit more robust. So this is how we can actually add all of these slot icons to each reel. You know, we're just creating 3 columns, right? And we're spacing them apart. We're creating this table at each individual index, which just stores its icon as a string so that we can draw it later. We can reference the right thing to draw. And then we have an x and a y value so that we can actually change these values. We can scroll them and then render them in the right location. So these are kind of like objects. Think of them as very lightweight objects in game development without needing to go into the weeds of making a class that represents a slot icon or a slot reel or a slot machine. We're dealing today with just sort of raw tables, which is a little bit easier. So here in love.draw, instead of doing a loop of just the individual icons one at a time, I can say for I is equal to 1 until 3, do this. I'm going to basically just draw the slot reels. So draw slot reels. And for KV in pairs of slot reels, do slot reals I, sorry, do love.graphics.draw at slot reals I k at and that'll be well, actually what this will be is gtextures at slot reals ik.icon, because remember we're storing the icon here, right here. So this is going to be a string. This is going to be v. This is just going to be whatever is in slot icons, which I realize we haven't actually filled out yet. So let's do that. Let's say apple 50, pineapple, banana, orange, lemon, strawberry, and am I missing any of them? Cherry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, okay. So that's all of them, if I'm not mistaken. So those are our slot icons. So now those are the v is going to map to one of these strings because we're assigning it here, right? So kv in pairs of slot icons. The v is going to be whatever's stored here. The k is just going to be its numerical index. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so all we're doing is we're just adding one of each of those into each reel. And then here we just draw them. So we iterate over our reels, 1, 2, 3. And then we just iterate over the actual table, the subtable of the slot machine. And then we're going to draw the texture at the icon that we're storing. It's going to return a string, remember. Then we can say slot reels I k dot x and slot reels I k dot y. If everything is correct, which it's not, slot margin is a nil value at line 27. Slot margin. Oh, slot padding. Sorry. Slot padding. Cool. Awesome. So this is those are our 3 reels, right? You can see what they look like underneath the hood. This is how we're representing what the reels actually look like. But we're clearly not drawing them correctly. But we can continue with this idea and sort of see what this looks like, how this evolves, if we keep going with it. And is that all laid out correctly? I think it is, right? We might have to futz with the. Why is there's some weird blue coloring going on back there? Not entirely sure what that's all about. Oh wait, am I drawing something funky? I don't think I am, right? No, I don't think so. No, I don't think I am. But yeah, you get a sense. Hopefully that illustrates a sense of what the how we're actually storing the slots. And then Adam's asking, can we get a casino image for the background? Sure, why not? Let's do that. Free casino background images. Some slow internet here. The poker chip backgrounds aren't appropriate, but let's see. Something like this. I mean, this isn't a casino background. That's like a skyline. Not super appropriate. What's good here? Let me pull up the image that you referenced. The only thing is, it just probably has to be royalty free, just to avoid having any issues, right? Does this work? Oh, that's cool. I like that image. But is it royalty free? If it is, then I can certainly pull it up. It's on Assets, Adobe Assets. I do like the I like the idea. Oh, this one here. This is cool, right? Is this a this free? Is this royalty free? Download free? Crediting isn't required, but is appreciated and allows photographers to gain exposure. OK. Cool. Well, you saw where I got it from. Unsplash.com. It looks like it's free, so it says crediting is not required. So hopefully that means that we'll be safe if we use it. It's this BenOE icon. Now, what's the resolution of it? It is 6,000 by 4,000. Holy crap. OK. Let's open that with I'll open it with Photoshop, and then we'll just shrink it down to 720p, and then we'll use it. Colton, if you have time, make a semantic UI and Bootstrap web development one with jQuery tutorials. That's a good idea. I think I might do something like that. OK, it's not looking like that's working. Let's open it with asprite. OK, sprite size. Let's bring the height down to 720. Oh, it's 1080. Interesting. OK. Let's make sure the width is at least 1280. That's fine. I was going to say that looked garbage, but no, we're OK. OK. Cool. Let's save that. And let me rename it to Casino. Let's go back over to our thing here. We're going to go over to dependencies again. Whoops. And I'm going to just add the casino image in here. So I'll say casino is equal to love.graphics.new image graphics/casino.jpg. And let's go ahead now, lastly, draw right here, love.graphics.draw gtextures casino. Nice. It's a little bit low. So let's actually shift it up a little bit. We'll say 0, -100. Cool. It's a little busy, I will say, but you know, it works. It's not bad, right? It kind of almost slots in right next to the slot machine here, so it's kind of cute. It's kind of funny. So thanks to Adam for the suggestion. Pretty cool. What's the need for local variable slot icons? Why not use G icons? The reason rule that we're using a local variable. This G icons right here, we're using just to generate the list of textures. And I made it global just because I wasn't 100% sure if we would need a set of all the images later on. I don't remember offhand just yet. But the difference is this slot icons here directly maps to how we lay out each individual column of slot icons. So what that means is that instead of having all these different ones, let's say I wanted to do apple, 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 apple 50. Now I have a weighted collection of slot reels. If they're not all a set, right? I have a very low chance of getting 3 50s in a row and a very high chance of getting either 3 apples in a row or, well, it's a very high chance of getting 3 apples in a row, a slightly lower chance, actually quite a bit lower chance of getting no matches, and then a low chance of getting 3 50s in a row. That's the reason that we have a separate local table, because that is going to be, this is where we're going to set the weights of our sort of the probabilities for our slot machine by just putting whatever strings we want in the right order, right? And in this case, I always want 50 to be here because 50 is where we're going to see this right at the slot machine's instantiation. And so I want the 50s to be visible sort of right away. So we're putting 50 number 2, and then everything else we weight as we wish. So I'm going to say pineapple. I'm going to make these all a set again. We're going to tweak these odds a little bit later to make it more representative of an actual slot machine. So let's say cherry, strawberry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then what are we missing? We are missing the banana. So that's the reason. Hopefully that makes sense. So we have our slot reels now. Let's actually start scrolling them, right? This is something that we should probably do to get the behavior that we're looking for, right? So what I can do is I can say basically I want a list of velocities. So I'll say slot velocities is going to be equal to a table that's 0, 0, and 0. And specifically, this velocity is a y velocity. So these slot reels are going to faux rotate. They're going to move on the y-axis over time. This is what's going to give it the effect of sort of scrolling. Oh yeah, I did change it back, Bavik, because I wanted it to look a bit more interesting visually. I didn't want a bunch of apples. 2 over 5 to the power of 3 times 100 minus the percent of hitting the jackpot. Yeah, I would have to spend a couple seconds thinking about that. I'm not great at math off the top of my head. If you set it to global, what would go wrong in this case, says Astley? If we set, in this case, we could set most of these to global, and it wouldn't matter too much. Global is something that you want to do to avoid when you have a larger code base with a bunch of different modules that might have name collisions. That's where globals get tricky. In a single file, it's not as big of a deal, right? It can be a big deal if you have a lot of the same variable in a lot of the same places and you're not making any of them local. Then you can have sort of the state of your application can change out from underneath you at any given time because you have everything wired all over the place. But local sort of at the top level, local is effectively making it global. So it's kind of up to you. It's a habit for me to make module level variables local if I'm developing an application, just to avoid this issue. So something that you should do, just kind of add a habit, kind of make things global willingly rather than by default, is how you should think about it. All right, so let's make these slot reels actually move vertically, which we can do pretty easily. If I say, let's just go ahead and say in our update, this is where our update function actually comes into play. We'll say for 1 is equal to, I is equal to 1 until 3. I want to essentially take whatever the velocity is at index I in slot velocities and sort of multiply that by dt, which will be dependent on my frame rate, and that will scroll the y position of our each individual icon. So I can say for kv in pairs of slot reels I do v, let's say, how is this best done? This will be, so v reel in that pair. Actually, no, sorry, that's not incorrect. That's not correct. It'll be icon, right? And then I say icon.x.y is equal to icon.y minus the slot velocities I times delta time. So if slot velocities I is equal to 0, this won't have any effect on moving anything, of course. And shout out to our special guest here. We have DJM in the house.
Hey, nice to see everyone. Just wanted to say hello.
How's it going?
Good. I see some familiar names in the chat already.
We do. This is what we have working so far. We're in Las Vegas today.
Wow, that looks so realistic.
We're making, I know, right? We're making a slot machine. So this is a fun fact. This is how slot machines are represented underneath what you see on the front, or at least typically in a 2D game.
In a circle, though, presumably.
In a circle, yeah. So we're about to illustrate how things move up and how you would represent things looping around eventually. But to get us started, we have a very interesting...
It's a little personal touch there.
Yeah, I figured for a jackpot, 7's a little, I feel a little bit outdated at this point. I think 50 is also a higher number than 7, so I think logically that makes sense.
Well, Adamantine, nice to see you. Bella Kurz, Bavik Knight, Alepo, hola, usted también, and Asli T, nice to see you as well. All right, well, Bavik Knight's already getting back into the math, so let me step out, but I'll see you all in the chat. Great to tune in, everyone. Thank you.
Cool, thanks for popping in. Appreciate it. All right. So, and I realized actually as I was pulling up that window, I forgot to set the name of the window. So let's do that as well. love.window.setTitle slot50. Boom. So there we go. And that's how, if you want to change the little title bar at the very top, that's how you would do that. You would say love.window.setTitle and then a string, in this case, slot50 made sense. Slot machine 50. Cool. So this is the sort of algorithm behind actually scrolling our slot machine. Now notice I ran the application, but we didn't actually get anything scrolling. Nothing was being multiplied because our velocity is 0. If we're multiplying, if we're minusing something by 0, it's not going to move. But if I set these all to, let's say, 30, 30, and 30, we will see that our slot machine is indeed moving, right? Now, there's a problem in as much as things will just keep moving forever, and this isn't really ideal behavior, right? We want this to loop in a wheel. We want it to be a forever movement, right? And so in order to do that, we need to actually think about how we can get our table to sort of loop in and around itself. And also Virtuoso7, thank you for joining. Babak is very much a fan of the formulas. We've just been kindly plugging them into the chat. Let's go ahead and figure out how we might go around implementing sort of a recursive, not recursive, a infinitely looping data structure to represent this. Now, I think what we want to do, oh, and also, will the coins eventually move depending on how much is won? Those coins are statically drawn, so that probably we won't implement. You could certainly do something like that, though, yourself. If you had a coin sprite and you won a certain amount, you could create a loop that spawned a particle or a coin sprite that kind of moved. You could even create what's called an object pool and do it, but no, in this case, that's just a statically drawn. That's just there for in the texture itself. Not animated. You can do that or anything else. I just want to find my chances of winning a jackpot, or maybe how many times I have to hit the wheel to hit the jackpot. And I want to illustrate also sort of where we're going with this, because if I just do something like this, if I just move the slot machine down after I draw the individual slot icons, what happens is that you can sort of see what the slot machine looks like, right? It's just that our images are getting drawn wherever they are, right? There's no condition to separate or to like differentiate where the icons are getting drawn. It's just sort of naively drawing them to wherever their XY value is, which is not ideal. It's not where we want to go. So we have a few bits and pieces that we need to figure out. But we can absolutely do this. So let's implement the next part, which is the actual recursion of, I keep saying recursion for some reason, the actual looping around of the texture when it gets to a certain height, right, which we can do. So if I say, let's do this in update. So in update, if we say at the end of our loop, for I is equal to 1, 3, do if, and again, so let's add some comments here. So we'll say scroll all of the reels, right? So this will just scroll them up. And then here we can say loop reel if necessary. So for each reel, we can say if slot reels I1 dot y is less than, let's say, I have the number here actually. Let's see, where did I have the number? Just to save us too much time, like trying to find it. 174 was the number that I found. OK, so 174. And so let's actually, again, make this a constant. So we'll say slot loop y. We'll bring that into constants. So slot loop y is equal to 174. So what we do is we say, if it's less than that, less than 174, so if the first thing that we're drawing, which is at the top, is less than 174, I want to say table.insert. We're going to insert into that reel, into slot reels I, the result of calling table.remove on slot reels I at index 1. So in one operation, we're removing an object from our reel and then adding it to the end. We're taking the first thing and bringing it to the end, right? And by doing that, we're actually shifting everything back up to index 1. And so we get this infinitely looping data structure. So let's actually experiment with it and see if it works. Whoops, main 54, comparing thing with nil. If slot reals I1 dot y is less than slot loop y. Oh, I forgot to save. My bad. OK, so let's see if this works. Doesn't look like it is. Hold on a second. Yeah, that is not, OK, it's not working. So something I have is messed up here. So if table.insert into slot reals I, the result of calling table.remove of slot reals I1. Am I going crazy? Slot reals I1, right, which is the first thing, it has a y value. It's less than slot loop y, right? OK. Which is 174. So it's less than 174, down, coming down. Then we're going to insert back into that table. Oh. Yeah. That's the problem. The problem is that we need to actually change the y value. So this method sounds like a differential equations problem. I wouldn't go that far. I don't think so. I don't even know. I do not know differential equations at all. I know of them, but I am not mathematically equipped to provide anything of that complexity. What we're doing is we're forgetting to set the y value so of that new element. So what we need to do is we need to say, basically, slot reals I at index, in this case, it's going to be index 8. It's going to be the last, or sorry, it's not going to be 8 because we're going to make this flexible. It's going to be whatever the length of slot icons is. So we can say at the length of slot icons dot y is going to be equal to whatever slot reals I at slot icons minus 1 dot y is, plus icon size. So this should work, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. We are scrolling infinitely. We did it. And we can't quite see it visually. So I'm actually going to shrink this thing down by just 1 so we can maybe see it popping into place dynamically, right? So you see the strawberry, boom, there's the apple, and boom, there's the 50, and then boom, there's the lemon. So you can see this infinite loop, right? We're taking whatever comes at the top and it just instantly gets teleported to the end of the table. And this is how you infinitely loop something like this in the context of 2D game development. And when everything is hidden, you actually don't see this going on, so you actually don't know this is happening. This is why you need to use illusion in order to make this look infinite, right? And I think this sort of same idea applies to a lot of generation in games, is that you provide an illusion of infinite sort of spreading by hiding certain things that make it possible. Hiding pop-in, texture pop-in, and terrain pop-in in 3D worlds. This is kind of how like open world game streaming works, right? You're playing a character, you're moving around, and the terrain in an open world can't all possibly be loaded into memory at one time, especially for large modern games, especially for infinite games like Minecraft. So what happens is everything gets streamed in at real time. It keeps track of where your character's position is. When you reach a certain border, right, stuff far away gets unloaded, and then new stuff gets loaded around you up to a certain radius. And this is what gives you the feeling of being in this open, massive world, but in reality, you're just kind of in this area that's getting bits and pieces added onto it to trick you into thinking you're into an open world, right? So that's the same idea, same concept is being applied here. We're just adding and moving things around to give us the illusion of an infinitely scrolling loop or infinitely scrolling slot reel, sort of like a wheel in 2D space, but it's just a trick. It's just a little illusion. Just read 311994. I apologize for the name below that. It looks like it's Korean or Chinese. I'm not actually sure. That looks like it could be either one. I generally can differentiate. Alejo Galma, thank you very much. Hell for Sunny, Bobby Rod 01. Appreciate the follows. Thanks to all of you. Having Knight saying, nope, just basic number theory. Paul can help with that. I'm not sure what that's a reference to. What are we removing with slot reels I1, says Asley. What we're doing, Asley, is we are essentially saying the first index of our table, of our slot reel, right, is if it gets up to like, it's going to be roughly around this spot here on our slot machine. When it reaches that point, we're removing that. We're removing from slot reels I, which is just a table, at index 1. That's the first icon. It's hidden at that point. We're removing it, but we're also including it into a table.insert into that same slot reels. So it gets added to the end of the table, and then it gets assigned a new Y value. That's essentially what we're doing. So everything sort of stays indexed based on the right order. We can keep track of everything in the same space, and based on its vertical height, we can therefore compare the index at each individual spot, and that'll map to the same row in our slot machine, especially when we grid align them in a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Hopefully that makes sense, Asley. It's index 1 of our list of icons, and we're just removing the first index and adding it to the same table so it goes at the end. So number 1 gets added to the end instead, and then that all gets shifted such that number 2 now becomes number 1, number 3 becomes number 2, and so on and so forth. But number 1 gets made number X, whatever the number of icons is. So that is the 1. That's what the 1's goal in life is. Yeah, this 1 refers to index 1 of the table. So we're removing from index 1, as opposed to the end. By default, table.remove will remove the last element. We don't want to remove the last element. We want to remove the first element and bring that to the end, which is what we're doing with this table.insert, because insert adds to the end, right? So we're adding to the end what we removed from the beginning, from number 1. Cool. All right, so we have an infinitely scrolling set of icons now. In order to make this look more convincing, all we have to do is just say if the if v dot y, actually, can we do v dot icon here? I think we can, right? Yeah, I think we can, right? If I'm not mistaken. If v.y is less, or if v.y is greater than 140 and v.y is less than 400, we'll say draw all of the, we'll draw this. This is just ballpark. I'm not actually 100% sure, but this should result in our slot machine now looking more or less normal. Like it's an infinitely scrolling slot machine. It's not. It's no longer showing what's happening sort of below the slot machine, right? It's not showing behind the scenes how it's implemented. That all still exists. Those things are still here. They're still moving. They're just not rendering because the if statement is preventing them from being drawn in the draw call. And Apple Watch Gang, hey, hey, hey. Kevin says, how can I learn? If you're referring to learning Love2D, I would say go to the website, download Love2D, go to the wiki. Unless you're referring to something more general, if you're learning about computer science, I would say probably take CS50. And yeah, Asley kindly plugged the CS50 on edX and also the streams. A lot of the resources that we have on CS50's YouTube and Facebook, those are all great. Apple Watch says, is this part of CS50 or something extra? This is part of CS50. This is an offshoot of CS50 where we take a lot of the CS50 staff, myself included, and we implement things from scratch, and we cover concepts. David likes to come in here and also sometimes talk about things we've implemented, concepts that are relevant to what we do here, like Docker, for example. Render 50 he did an example of, regular expressions. It goes all over the place. But I typically do game development, and we make stuff from scratch on stream. So that's what we're doing today. We're making a slot machine. And so far, we're actually pretty far along. This is, I would say, a pretty robust, looking at least, slot machine. Now, we do have other stuff that needs to be addressed. For example, we need to be able to actually trigger the reels going when we press spacebar, but there's more to it than that, but we are sort of halfway there. All right. Also, let's see what it looks like if we bump this up. So normally what this is going to look like when we get to the end, this is going to be 500. This is a velocity that I realized was pretty good. So this is what the slot machine will look like when we actually run it. I think when we press spacebar, this is kind of what it's going to look like. We're going to press spacebar, the slot reels are going to move like this quickly, and then we'll press spacebar again, and they'll slow down. But they'll also speed up from nothing when we hit spacebar, and that sort of process of speeding up and slowing down the movement is, I think, important. Because here, I'll illustrate what we can do. We can say this gets set to 0, and then we'll say if key is equal to space in the key pressed handler, then for I is equal to 1, 3, we'll say set velocity of reels. We'll say slot velocities at index I is equal to 500. Right? So it starts at nothing, and then if I press spacebar, you can see that it kind of just instantly goes into fast mode, right? It's just instantly really fast. And then if I hit, let's just say slot velocities I is equal to 500 and 0 or 500. So now I can toggle this, right? But this isn't really realistic. The slot machine typically has the effect of the reels start up, and then they slow down, and then they also happen 1, 2, 3. They don't happen all at the same time, right? Otherwise, it'd be a pretty easy game to win, right? So this also is just the way you do ternary expressions in Lua. You give it the condition, which is slot velocities I equal to 500? If it is, return 0. If not, return 500. And that gets assigned to this variable here. And this is a ternary expression. And are you going to do different velocity for different columns? Asks Bavik. We're going to do different velocities sort of. They're going to all start off at slightly different times, but they're not going to be different velocities. They're all going to be the same velocity as they warm up. They're all going to warm up to 500 and slow down to 0, but they're not going to be assigned different velocities now. That would, I think, weight your odds of winning a given symbol, I think. Because I think you could more, maybe you could anticipate winning in a different way. But I'm not entirely sure. It gets a little bit more complicated at that point. But we're not going to implement that. So not necessarily part of completing the course as Apple Watch. No, this isn't strictly related to the course. This is something that you could use as an ancillary material, at least my streams, to some of our spin-off courses. Like, for example, I teach a games course that CS50 produces. You could use this material, for example, today's stream, as a sort of a side project to, I guess, supplement that. And a lot of the other streams that we do on Python and on C and other things you could use to supplement CS50. But the Twitch streams aren't part of the core of completing the course. They're meant just to sort of introduce you to new topics and to also let you ask questions and chime in and make this a bit of a collaborative process. Eastland says, hey, Bretta. Hey, Eastland, and good to see you. And Asley's kindly plugged my game stream as well. Cool. All right. So now we have the ability to start and stop our slots at a given point using love.keyPressed, which is great. So this sort of works. It's easy to get the same thing. And notice that they're also not grid aligned, so I can stop it sort of like halfway like this, which isn't how slot machines usually work. Excuse me. A little bit sorry. I need to drink a little more Coke Zero. This isn't how slot machines usually work. They're usually grid aligned so that the icons will always end in the exact same spot in the middle of the screen. This is what we'll be implementing so that we can therefore test that core row of icons and know that it's what the user is seeing when they get a match. A Coke Zero sponsor? No, not quite. We'd be pretty rich if we did have a Coke Zero sponsorship, though. Alejo asks, do you think Lua is the most efficient language for making video games? The most efficient language? That's a very subjective question, I think. I think Lua is a very nice language for rapid prototyping, and Love2D makes it really nice. I think it's an excellent scripting layer for modern engines. I don't know if I necessarily say it's the most efficient language for making video games. You can make an argument about Unity being probably one of the more efficient platforms. And they use C# for their scripting. But this is developer dependent. If you're a very efficient C++ programmer, you could very likely make a game faster than I could make a game in Lua, because you just have a set of skills that let your brain and C++ work together well to create a product. And this is the thing about languages. They vary depending on who you are, what you respond to, how you think about solving problems. Lua makes a lot of things nice and convenient, I think, in the general case, in that you don't have to manage memory, and you get a nice, concise, simple language to express a lot of stuff with, and it's pretty lightweight and really fast. So I think Lua is a contender, but I am disinclined to make any objective comments along the lines of whether Lua is the most efficient language or whether any language is the most efficient language. I would say find what's good for you. I tend to be pretty efficient at making games in Lua versus other languages myself, but not more so than other people. This is just speaking on my behalf. I like Lua and Love2D, and I can think well in that space. But I can also think fairly well in Unity and C#, so it really depends. True Kines, hello, good to see you. Virtuoso7, thanks, pretty amazing answer to language references. Thanks, appreciate it. Glad you think so. All right, so let's add this sort of gradual effect of increasing the speed of our slots, because that's an important aspect, I think, of the feedback of the slots, right? And we have another hour and a half, hour-ish or so we can keep adding features to this to make it work. And the core that I want to do is slow down and stop the slots and be able to stop the 3 slots individually, and then make sure they get aligned at the end on the same row, and then test for equality. And if they're equal, we'll have some feedback that lets us know that we got a match. We can highlight the individual icons, or we can display a different, maybe a light color background or an effect or something. We'll probably just highlight the icons. So let's go ahead now and think about slowing down and rather speeding up and slowing down the slots. What we want to do is we basically want to take that delta y, which is our velocity, our y velocity, and we want to, instead of setting it to 500 or 0 instantly, back and forth like a switch, I want to interpolate from 0 to 500 over maybe 2 seconds. And I want to interpolate down from 500 to 0 over the same amount of time. So we can do this pretty easily with what's called a tween operation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the knife library from another thing that we might have done. Let's see, is it in Minesweeper? I don't remember. It looks like it is. Cool. So the knife library is awesome. So if you're unfamiliar with knife, it's here. Let's go to knife, Love2D. And it is on, airstruck/knife on GitHub, which is, whoops, not there. I should see if airstruck has other stuff, because knife is an amazing library. So here's the library. It's called Knife. It's on github.com/airstruck/knife. And there's a lot of really cool modules. We've talked about this on stream before. Today, I'm worried about timer. Timer is an amazing part of Knife that lets you do things over time. It's asynchronous. Doing this sort of thing by hand gets pretty tedious, because usually you have to manage a clock, and then you have to do a lot of if statements. And you get really cluttered bits of code. I kind of want to just say, after 2 seconds, do this. And then over 2 seconds, change this value to this value. So let's worry about that. Also, did the stream disappear? No? Bavik is saying the stream has disappeared. Is the stream messed up for other people? Definitely let me know. It looks like I'm still streaming. OK. Worried myself a little bit there for a second. It's happened before that we've lost the stream. So, but it looks like other people are, I'm not seeing any anomalies on my computer, and other people are saying that everything looks okay. Okay, cool. Glad everything's working. Bavik and I'm not sure what's going on. You probably can't hear me if you think the stream is gone, but I would tell Bavik to refresh. So maybe folks can tell him to refresh the stream on his end. Might be his browser. Anyway, so knife.timer. So you can just grab it here. You'll get a bunch of Lua files. I'm going to go ahead, grab knife. I'm just going to copy that, the whole folder, because I don't care too much. And I'm going to bring it over into slot machine. I'm going to create a lib folder, and I'm going to paste knife in there with all of its Lua files. You'll see it has in here base Lua, behavior Lua, bind Lua, all these different Lua files, which is great. That's all we need. In dependencies, I'm going to say timer is equal to require lib/knife.timer. And then in main.lua, I can now use timer as a global object. Adam kindly plugged CodePen and JSFiddle to Kesavan54, who was asking for any websites to practice JavaScript online. So yeah, those are both really excellent. CodePen is a really cool website. I really like CodePen. Cool. We have knife. It now is in our project. So what I can do is I can say, when I hit space, maybe instead of having all of these all of the velocities get set either to 500 or 0 instantly, I can basically say, over the course of 2 seconds, I want you to influence the velocity. So I can say, we'll say timer dot tween, and then we'll say over 2 seconds, pass in an object which takes in slot velocities, and we'll say at index 0, I'm going to bring that up to 500. We do the same thing for 1, and the same thing for 2. Right? So if I hit space now, what should happen, and one other thing that's really important, you actually have to call timer.update a delta time in your update function for this to work. I should be able to hit space bar. Whoops. Timer. I'm unable to perform arithmetic on local initial, a null value. OK, let's see what's going on here. Slot velocities, is that a thing? Yep, that's a thing. Timer.tween to over 2 seconds. We are passing in slot velocities, the table. Key pressed key. This is strange. Oh, sorry. 0 indexed. I'm silly. It needs to be 1, 2, 3. Lua is not 0 indexed, and to this day, I still struggle with this issue. But now, if we hit spacebar, notice that instead of starting off immediately really fast, it interpolated the value in slot velocities from 0 to 500 over 2 seconds. Right? Pretty cool. All right. So now what we can do is I can say, basically if, we'll say slot velocities at index 1 dot, slot velocities 1 is equal to 500, right? We'll say, because we'll check to see that that's actually completely finished ramping up. Then we'll, if it's equal to 0, we'll do this. Else, if slot velocities 1 is equal to 500, then we're going to do a different thing. We're going to say for I is equal to 1, 3, do, and then I'm just going to copy this. But instead of setting 1 to 500, 500, 500, now I want to go the opposite direction. I want to actually interpolate it to 0. So I can say 0, 0, 0. So now I'm going to hit spacebar. I'm going to give it a couple seconds to ramp up to full speed. And if I hit spacebar again, notice that it does indeed get brought down to speed 0. So pretty cool. We now have the ability to ramp up and ramp down in speed. Pretty great, right? Cosmic Louise 92, CodePen just recently announced LÖVE 2D beta. Oh, that's really cool. OK, that's awesome. I actually could find that pretty useful for like maybe another version of the games course, because we can make this web-based, and that would be super helpful for a lot of people. Why does Lua not change it? Do they not get complaints? I suspect they probably do get a lot of complaints, Asley, but at this point, there's probably so much legacy code that I don't know. Like, to Bavik's point, backward compatibility can be kind of a pain. So my guess is it relates to that. Not 100% sure. I think it is pretty... It's so counter to what most programming languages take as norm. It trips people up, even like me, and I do this a lot. I'm not a master, but I do it enough to where I shouldn't be running into this problem, but I still do subconsciously, especially if I'm going between Python and Lua and like some other language like C#. Yeah, it's Lua's specialty, exactly. Eva V Actress 29 says hello. Hello, Eva. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. So we've ramped up, we've ramped down. Now, let's get it to actually stop each individual column one at a time, right? And also, thank you, Eva, for the follow as well. And Pieces of Bleep, thank you for following. And I think I also said just Breed 31, 1994. Oh, Pieces of UK. Pieces of UK, I see. It could also be read Pieces of something that I will not say on camera. But Colton, you're going to love MATLAB then. Oh, is MATLAB 1 indexed as well? I wouldn't be surprised. I need to get better at math. I'm honestly terrible at math, really, if I'm being honest. I can do game math when I need to do it, but like one of my goals in the near future is to actually dive into like advanced math and really get a solid math education, because I do not have anything beyond like high school algebra and trigonometry. Like I took trigonometry in college and never went into calculus or diffie-qs, which people talked about earlier in the chat, or like linear algebra. I am lazy at math. I want to not be lazy at math. I want to get better at math. Paul's online math notes. Interesting. Paul's online math notes. Huh. That's cool. I didn't realize this was a... I might check this out. That's cool. Thanks for the link, Adam. Appreciate it. And then Chromatos, thank you for the follow as well. What did you study in college? Because you're a computer scientist, right? I studied programming. But generally for most programming, you don't really need like calculus or anything like super advanced. You usually just need... You'll need I mean, I didn't even study discrete math, which is another thing that I want to study. I've looked at bits and pieces of it over time. But yeah, calculus is more for when you go into things like physics or chemistry, things like that. What kind of slot are you making? Is it for CSGO? No, not quite. This is just a game. So we're making a slot machine that looks like this, just to illustrate how you would do this in something like LÖVE 2D, which is the framework we're using today. And currently we're at the point where we have slots, and then we can start and stop them, and they infinitely scroll, which is pretty cool. We've made some pretty fair progress. But the next goal that we want to do is we want to be able to actually stop each individual column, and we want them to be aligned with the center of each slot reel, so that they line up perfectly when they're finished, even if we end them at any arbitrary point in time. Because as we see here, we can end them, but it has the result of actually kind of stopping halfway sometimes, right? It's non-deterministic when they're actually stopped. Or at least it's probably deterministic. It's just hard to anticipate when to press space to get them to stop perfectly. So we need to do that. So we need to actually make sure that we basically bring the velocity down. Instead of to 0, we need to bring it down to 30, right? Something like this. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring the slots up to 500. And then when we press spacebar, we're going to bring it down to 30. And then we're going to have a random number of offsets here where basically the slot will stop after it loops a certain number of times, right? So when it gets to, it'll basically be random for each column, and then we can stop each column individually. So what this will have the effect of doing is, even if we end the slot machine, like sometimes you won't quite know which one it's going to line up with, and there's a little bit of randomness there, which kind of, I don't know if it actually weighs the probability in a different way or if it's still equal outcomes, but it makes it a little bit more interesting. This is how slot machines typically work when you see them and when you use them in real life. So we'll do that. The way that I ended up wanting to do this is having a, what did I call it? I called it stops, yeah. So I have a set of notes here. I haven't really been using it too much, mostly for those constants that I pulled up earlier. But here I have a stops table, which is going to be a table that maps to each individual reel as well. And what I can say is each stop will have a target, right, and a total. And what this is going to mean is basically every time we stop our reel, it's going to keep track of how many, when it gets to when it gets to the velocity of 30 pixels per second, it's going to basically check to see what's my target number of slot icons I want to scroll up after I hit 30, and then when I reach the target, stop there, like stop looping, and that's the final value, right? So this gives us a way to get that last bit of scrolling and then finalize our choice and then lock everything to a grid, because we're going to do this based on loops. We're going to count loops, and then we're going to cut our velocity in our update function where we actually do the looping. So I'll show you that. The total is going to be equal to 0 there. So these map to our reels. So 1, 2, and 3 map to slot reel 1, 2, and 3. These are the number of basically loops that we're going to let happen after we reach our velocity of 30 instead of 500. So what we can do is say, what's going to happen? There's a few bits and pieces to this, a few flags we also need to set. But in my update, I can say, if, because we're gonna do this in the looping part of our program. So I can say if stops at index I. So this is where for each reel we're checking basically to see if it's time to loop our icon down to the bottom of that reel. So if stops I dot target is equal to, well, actually what we do here is we're going to say if slot reels I dot target is greater than 0. So we only want to really check this only check if we have a target, right? Because we're not going to have a target until we hit spacebar to slow down our reels. And actually the target gets set here when we actually set the velocities to 30. Once that's finished. And actually the way that we do that is we say, once we've gotten our velocities down from 500 to 300, and once that's finished by calling this finish function on the tween, we say on finish, basically, I want you, and we give it an anonymous function. We pass in an anonymous function. I say slot velocities, we say stops at I dot target is going to be am I doing this more times than I need to do? Am I setting this? Oh, you know what? I am. Okay, yeah, let's do that. This needs to be set to I is equal to 30. I'm actually creating an unnecessary number of these things happening. I'm creating like a bunch of these tweens. So I want to say I is equal to 500 like that. There we go. Yeah, that was, it worked fine. It's kind of like one of those hidden bugs that doesn't really cause issues, but you're doing more work than you need to be doing. I was having, basically multiplying the number of tweens I actually need by 3. So we only need that. We don't need that to happen. So I say stops I.target is going to be equal to math.random 3, right? So it's going to be, we're going to have from 1 to 3 stops. And actually, an important thing that we do every time that we use random is in load, what I want to do is I want to say, after all this stuff, math.random seed os.time, just like that. And so now we have a target in each stop. Each reel will have a target from 1 to 3. So that way it doesn't take too long. We don't have like 10, we don't have it like we're looping 10 times until it gets to the end. We want to avoid that, right? So now, this is where, at this point is where we have a target. This is when we're at 30 pixels and we're waiting to finalize our slot actually scrolling. So I can say if target is greater than 0, then I say slot reels I dot total equals slot reels I dot total plus 1. And what I do after that is I say if slot reels I dot target is equal to slot reels I dot total. So this means that we've looped the number of times that we've targeted for that reel after we've slowed it down. So once that happens, what we can do is we can say slot velocities at I dot y is going to be equal to 0. And then did I end up actually setting the x or y value? I don't remember. Did I actually do that? Offhand, I don't completely remember. Oh, that doesn't even take a y also to begin with, but that's not important. It's I think that's it. I think I've done the math such that the numbers fit perfectly. I think that's what I did. Roughly perfectly. I may have actually missed setting the numbers perfectly in my example, but they don't need to be perfect because the rows will match based on the way it works with looping. Whatever's at that index will be the same up above. So based on their vertical position, they map even if they're not completely perfect, but they should map perfectly. If not, we can set the number ourselves manually, which is totally fine. Oh, and also it works because the velocity is so low actually when we're moving up and we're going past a certain number, and we're testing for, yeah, it actually is fine. There's not really a situation in which we're moving more than 1 pixel per second, or per frame rather. So because we're moving 30 pixels a second, we're moving every 2 frames. Yeah, so actually we're okay. We're perfectly fine. Everything will be, that's how everything stays aligned. If this were moving at a velocity that was higher than 60, we would run into potential issues there of things getting staggered, but it's unlikely to happen. We could run into an issue of that happening if you're running at a frame rate lower than 30. We won't worry too much about that. That would be something to think about for a production application, though. OK, so this is cool. So slot velocities will get set to 0 if that's the case. So actually, let's test this. Let's see if this works. Whoops, main 89. If slot reels I.target is greater than 0. Oh, sorry. Stops. Stops. Yeah, stops, not slot reels. Wrong variable. OK, let's try this. Let's see if they get grid aligned. Stop it. should get a random number to, so they're going to keep moving a little bit, but eventually they should stop. Yep. Perfect. So notice that they stopped perfectly aligned there in the middle. And the pineapples stopped at the exact same position serendipitously. They both rolled the random math.random number, but the cherry went one more because it actually got, presumably it rolled a 3 and the pineapples rolled a 2, or the cherry rolled a 2 and the pineapples rolled a 1. But they moved that number of tiles after stopping, after getting set their velocity to 30, and then eventually finalized on a location. So that's what happened there. That's cool. We have that working. Let's test to make sure that the let's test to verify that the same icon came up, that we can test that. Missed 3 in a row. Yeah, I know, right? Elm1 says rigged. Yeah, essentially, yeah, this is what rigging is, by adding these little things that screw it up. And we can also just have an if condition that says if match, keep scrolling one more. And that would be an example of rigging too. This is rigging in a kind of an innocent sense, in that we're just introducing more like a randomization of things. But I think ultimately it still keeps the odds the same, I want to think. Calamity X5, thank you very much for the follow. So another important thing that we wanted to do was to be able to make the slots independently move. And in order to do that, what I want to do is I'm going to have to add basically I think what I did was I just added chained if conditions. Is that what I did? Yeah, that's essentially what I did. So right here, what I'm basically doing is I'm setting I'm basically kicking off all of the slots at once, and then I'm stopping all the slots at once. But what I want to do is I want to kick off all the slots staggered, that's easy enough to do. I can do that here. I can say timer.tween. Actually, I'm going to just copy this like that. I'm going to replace this. And then we'll say 1, right? So after, just like that. So basically, I'm kicking off the 2-second thing, right? I'm saying after 2 seconds, I want your velocity. I want the velocity of the first reel to be 500. It starts at 0. I want it to be 500 after 2 seconds. Interpolate that value. What I can do is I can say timer.after 0.2 seconds. I want to do the exact same thing for number 2, right? So what I've done here is I've used a new function of timer called timer.after, where I basically let something happen after a certain amount of time. You pass in an anonymous function which contains the body of code that you want to execute after that certain length of time. In this case, 0.2 seconds. And then I'll do the exact same thing here, but after 0.4 seconds for number 3. So now if I run this, I hit spacebar, notice that they start at different times. They don't all kick off at the exact same time. There's a little bit of a delay, right? And actually what we can do is we can bring this down to 0.1 and 0.2 for a slightly more subtle effect, which looks a little bit less, I think, jarring up front as you do it. So that's that part. So now we have everything sort of happening at the same time, but it's staggered. So it doesn't look, everything's not quite following the exact same look through the whole time, right? And certain slot machines will differ on this, I think. I don't think this is something that's necessarily consistent across casinos and slot machine implementations. So here, what I'm going to do is now I'm going to check for slot machine or slot velocities 1, whether that's equal to 500. If that's equal to 500, then I can say after or over the course of 2 seconds, bring slot machine 1 down to 30, and when it finishes, bring stop 1 down to this, right? And I want this to happen sequentially, so I need these to be in else ifs. So I can say then else if slot velocities 2 is equal to 500, then do this for number 2. And then else if slot velocities 3 is equal to 500, do it for number 3. And there's probably a more clean way to do this, but given that these need to happen one after the other and they shouldn't all fire at the same time in a loop, I think it would require a little more engineering to get this to work in a more robust way. So right now we're just going to use else ifs, but you could certainly think of ways to do it more well engineered. Now what should happen is we let these all go up to 500, and then I can one at a time stop them. So I'm going to stop the first one. First one stopped, but notice that the second two are, or the second and the third one are still going. Hit space. Oh, and see, here's another problem though. We have a callback function that's expecting the first item to, that's checking to see, or rather whether something's velocity is 0, and if it is, it'll start the first reel again. We don't want that to happen. So actually what we need, this is where the flags come in. We need to say if slot velocity is 1 equals 0 and not running, right? And so here I need to add a variable called running, which is equal to false, right? And so here, then, I say running is equal to true. And so now, it won't check this condition again when the first reel is stopped and the other two are running, and we press spacebar to stop the second one. Running will still be false, right? Or it'll still be true. We only want running to be false after slot velocities 3 get set to 0, which we actually do down in our update function, right? So we say if I is equal to 3, then running is equal to false. Down where we actually when we're actually stopping the reels from 30 to 0, from 30 velocity to 0 velocity, we're checking to see if I is number 3. If it is, that means that's the third reel. If we stop the third reel, then we finish. Our slot machine's finished running. So we can run it again. So we'll have that ability. So let's go ahead and do this. Boom. I'm going to run it. I'm going to hit spacebar. Let the first reel finish. So we got not a lemon. We got an orange, it looks like. Hit spacebar. So second reel coming to, oh, I thought we were going to hit orange for a second. We got the cherry. And then lastly, we have the lemon. So this is cool. We have all three of these stopping. And if I press spacebar, notice that we can kick off everything once again. Now there is a bug here. Target is not being set to 0 when we, so if I hit spacebar now, this first thing should just go indefinitely. Because target, it'll probably be set to, I think it's going to be set to, I forget what it gets set to that bugs it out. It needs to get set to a, oh no, it's because target is greater than, it's always going to be greater than, or total is always going to be greater than target. Because total never gets set back to 0. So we need to set total to 0. So we do that here. We say stops I dot total is equal to 0. Now, this should work. If we stop all three of them, thank you to our Mark for the follow. Appreciate it. OK, now if I restart this, we'll restart it. That is not the behavior that I wanted. That is weird. That's a brand new, oh. Right. target needs to also be set to 0. Because it was doing the target checking for when it was running at full speed as well, which is not what we want. We want target and total to both be 0 when we are running the slot normally. OK, cool. Let's run this again. And then we'll do that, and then that, and then that. And everything should be working pretty well. Looks like it is. So this is cool. We have a slot machine that has 3 independent reels that are controllable. They speed up, they slow down, and now we can just simply check a win. So if we say, this is where we check for a win. Check for a win, and flag slot as finished running. So if I is equal to 3, let's go ahead and check for a win. We can say if slot reels I at index 2. Index 2 is always going to be what's visible within the reel where we can actually see it. So we say if slot reels I2 is equal to, well, actually, I think this will work no matter what, because the slots are all the same. Right? No, that's not the case. No, because this depends on what we have. Yeah, no, never mind. Scratch what I said. 2.icon is equal to slot reels sorry. So we're going to check slot reels 1 and index 2. So that's our first reel, second icon, is equal to the slot reels 2 at 2. So our second reel, second icon. And you can't do a triple equal comparison in Lua, so I actually have to say and slot reels at 3. 1, 2 is equal to slot reels at 3, 2. And these all need to be at icon. So that's checking to see if they have the same string of 50 or apple or banana or pineapple. If those are all the same, then we have a win condition. So I can just say win is true. Right? And so I'm going to just make a variable for that called win. It's set to false by default. And then what we can do is I can say, let's maybe highlight the 3 reels. So I'll say, we'll say, if those are going to be at the second one. So we'll just say if win love.graphics.rectangle, and this will be a fill rect. I'm going to set the color to graphics.setColor at 0.2, 0.2, or sorry, 111 at 0.2. And then I'm going to go ahead and say fill at slot reels I at 2. For I is equal to 1 till 3, do this. Make sure to set your color back to 1, 1, 1. The newer Love2Ds expect you to enter floating point values from 0 to 1. So I'm not using RGB values here, which is what you would do in a lot of contexts. 1, 1, 1 is full white. 0.2 means mostly transparent. This fourth value is the transparency from 0 to 1. 1 meaning you can completely see it. 0 meaning you can't see it at all. And then set color 1, 1, 1, 1 here. And then we're going to say, oh, right. Starts at XY, so this will be at this.x and slot reels I.y. And then this will be, I think, sorry, at 2y. And I think we'll make this 62 by 62. Actually, you know what? I think we might want to make this plus 2 And this, I think, will also make +2, if I'm not mistaken, based on how I have things drawn out. Maybe not the y. I think the x we will. And then draw this at 62, 62, if not 62, 64. The column size, or the width of the columns is a little bit narrower than 64, which is the only reason why I'm drawing the rectangle in a little bit of a weird way. But yeah, that's sort of why we're doing that. Okay. Let's make this easy to test. I want to make sure that we get 50 every time. So I'm just going to, well, actually, I'm going to comment this out, and then I'm going to say local slot icon is going to be equal to 50, 50, 50, 50, and 50. So there's 5 50s. There's no way we can lose this match. I'm going to run this. And then let's go ahead and stop all 3. Let's check for a test. Interesting. They highlighted even after the 3rd one finished. So it's a slight bug. It finished sort of asynchronously. So what we need to do is say, it gets slightly, this is a slightly tricky part about doing something that's asynchronous like that. You have a bunch of things happening at once that happen at different times, and you have something that relies on all of them sort of like all of them finishing and being completed. So I think there's a way to do this in timer, actually. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's a timer.all. Is that not the case? I thought there was a way to do that in timer nice and cleanly. I mean, what we could do is we could check, we could do a in finish. What we could do, here's what we could do. We could say in our, up here where we basically have, well, actually, no, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do. If we're not checking just I is equal to 3, what we need to do is, no, yeah, this isn't what we need to do at all, actually. I had this all messed up. Yeah, I is equal to 3 doesn't necessarily mean that that's, yeah, that's not necessarily accurate. So what we can do is we can say, here's what we do. We say if slot reals I dot 1, right, no, here's what we do. We say if slot velocities 0, 1, not 0, is equal to slot velocities 2 and slot velocities 1 is equal to slot velocities 3, then we can do all that stuff, right? Yeah, because this will be checking for a 0 in this case. So will this work? Let's try it. Nice. There we go. That worked. I don't know if it was very easy to see on camera, but that's our slot machine. Yeah, it works. Now, after this point, you have the framework to do a lot of stuff. You could, to Adam's point, you could add a particle system that spawns coin textures inside the, coming from the bottom, which is one thing you could certainly do. You could add a graph on the left with a matching sort of set of tiers of like how the rewards map to coin values that you get dispensed from the slot machine, right? You could have those coins then give you currency in which you could put into the slot machine. So you could start with a certain amount of coins in your wallet and then interact with the slot machine to try and grow your coins up to a certain threshold. There's a lot of different avenues you can go to. Now, in order to finish it off, what we'll do is we'll mix up the numbers a little, or rather the icons a little bit. I'm going to put in 3 50s and 3 apples. And we'll see if it still works. Make sure that things aren't bugged, right? Okay, so we got 3 50s and it worked. Let's run it again. Well, it is still bugged actually, because I realized we're not setting win to false when we rerun it. So let's do that. We'll set win to false. Right there. There we go. Cool. Okay, so this isn't going to be a win, right? So nope, notice that we didn't get the highlighting. So let's try it again. Oh, I forgot to stop it. My bad. Okay, let's try it again. This is the tricky part about testing slot machines, is that it takes quite a long time, which is unfortunate. Yeah, see, it just takes, even with this low level of, this low number of items, it gets hard to test. Let's try it. Come on. Ah, dang it. And this is why slot machines are dangerous. Because you can have really high odds and still not win anything. Damn. I am just having no luck. Yep. Nope. Well, clearly we can see that the not winning is working. The not highlighting on loss. Dang. Oh, come on. So close. I think it's safe to say that it is probably working because it did highlight when we won, and it hasn't highlighted any time that we've lost. So everything seems good. Everything seems pretty good. Yeah, rig says Bavik Knight. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Let me go ahead. Let's create a GitHub repo for this so people can add their own features as needed. Let's go ahead and GitHub. If anybody has any questions, this is a good time to ask, because we'll probably end up wrapping the stream now. So we got a little over 2 hours, almost 2.5 hours. We managed to get everything working the way that I at least envisioned the stream to have. This gives you, like I said, a foundation upon which you could add 1 million features. So if we had maybe a bunch of time, like 6-8 hours, we could go pretty crazy with it. But I think I will leave it up to the audience to, and I recommend this is a good exercise for you. Get BFXR, get some sound effects, or you didn't even need BFXR. Get a jackpot sound effect or something, and download it, and then try to integrate this into this repo. I'm going to put it up here right now. Slot machine stream. Okay, let's make that public, create repo. Go ahead and do this. Let's see, cd dev stream slot machine, git init, git add dot, git commit, final commit. Cool, so that should be good. Let's refresh this. All right, cool. And you got my DS store in there, which is fantastic. I always forget about that. Nano git ignore. And then we'll do, this will be .ds store. Save that. And then get rm.ds store. Get add dot. Okay, let's refresh, and then no more DS store. Now you just got my git ignore. Cool. Plugged in the chat, but I'll integrate it myself. Oh yeah, I don't have the chat on this laptop either. It's I'm not logged into with the Twitch account, but definitely give it a try, Asley, and then let me know on the next stream what your success is, or post in the Facebook group or whatnot. Man, Andre says, good, just got back to a working slot machine. Yeah, it's pretty nice, right? Ding, ding, ding. Upcoming streams, Ask the True Kines. On Friday this week, we'll have Connor Doyle, one of our producers, for the first time on stream, is going to do Spark AR. Next Tuesday, it's going to be a stream with Nick. We're going to continue our CTF stream from last week. So the Stripe CTF that we did, we got a couple challenges through, but this next time we're going to try to get through the whole thing. So we'll see how far we can get. And then next Friday, and this will be confirmed by this Friday, I'm going to host a jQuery stream. So we'll do sort of a continuation of the web thread that we've established earlier in the year, going from, we've done Bootstrap and JavaScript, CSS, HTML, so next will be jQuery. And then not too far out, I've actually started learning React, so we might do some more React-oriented stuff and build up a full React page, which would be pretty cool. I think people probably generally are interested in that sort of thing. A bit of a far cry from the game stuff that I'm used to, but it's all fun. It's all good stuff. Ajax. Yeah, we'll probably cover some Ajax and jQuery, and maybe with Fetch, because Fetch is like the more modern way to do it. And the True Kines asks, AR augmented reality? Yeah, exactly. Spark AR is an AR sort of development studio. Shame Daddy didn't join. Yeah, I'm sure he's going to be watching this because I know he wanted to see it. He might also be watching, just not tuning into the chat. But yeah, shoutouts again. Thanks, Dad, for making the, not only suggesting the stream that we did today, which I thought was a nice 2D game illustration, but also for making the artwork. So super great, turned out awesome. Was a big fan of how it looked in the end. And also thanks to Own Infinity for the follow. Appreciate it. I missed that a few minutes back. So I'll take any last questions that people have so that we can end on a fun note here. And I actually feel quite good about where we left off. I feel like shame on me. I forgot to plug the actual stream URL. Probably should do that, right? So we'll say github.com/coltonoscopy/ slot machine stream. Download it, add your own features to it. If you do, let me know. I'd be curious to see, because it's a good foundation upon which you could make a whole kinds of cool stuff. And then, Bavik Knight, thank you for the stream. My pleasure. Tell us more about the background of your nickname. My friend Brian came up with that nickname when I was in high school, Coltonoscopy. And I think other people actually have come up with it online. So it's not the only one, but it's pretty funny. I did enjoy it. It's unique enough. It's memorable. So we'll stick with it. Sarul, my pleasure. Thanks for tuning in. Bavik Knight says, update the events page here. I think we updated it for this week. So, but yeah, I think today I'm going to scroll it over so that we see Tuesday. This was great. Thanks, Colton. Really missed the game stream, so hopefully we won't wait 3 weeks for our next one. Yeah, I know. We've been having fewer streams lately, but certainly we will work on getting more consistently, hopefully. And then Cerul's a Solitaire, though. Yeah, I need to dig into Solitaire and sort of in advance figure out all the pieces I need. The luxury I had today was that I implemented this last night and knew sort of where we were going, and it was at the top of my head. And for some of the more complex things, I'm realizing that it's actually better than come in completely blind with only having 2 or 3 hours of stream time. I think if I were doing this full time and I had like 8 hours to stream, we could do it all from scratch, smooth, and work it out, work all the kinks out. But I think with 2 or 3 hours, we end up splicing things into like 2 or 3 parts, losing momentum and not finishing things quickly enough. So it's kind of an issue. So I'll try and I think do more of the pre-baked cakes, so to speak, in advance. So Advocate is saying, Colton's learning more web now. That's true. I am definitely. Play devil's advocate. When you don't plan, we see the planning part too, and that's also great. Yeah, I think I enjoy that. I enjoy having this be bi-directional and having people suggest things too, and having bugs be sort of like a collaborative process, not so much like a unidirectional like sort of flow of information. That's part of this platform's appeal to me. Do you have a YouTube channel where we can find all the past streams? Yep, TrueKinese plugged it, youtube.com/CS50. We have on the homepage, we have the CS50 on Twitch playlist. It's the #2 playlist. Check out David's lectures while you're there if you haven't already checked them out. It was kind of cool to see you working it out online, because that's because how it is when we code. Yeah, absolutely. People usually put together videos of coding, but they'll have things like, make something in 10 minutes, or make Snake in 10, 15 minutes. But that's all something they've practiced in advance to get it down to 10 or 15 minutes. And we could do the same thing. I could memorize how to program Snake in 10 minutes, but it's not useful as much, I think, to you. If you're an advanced developer, I think it makes sense to get a 10-minute distillation of something, but even I don't want to see how it's done in 10 minutes because I understand that that's not how it's realistically implemented. I'm more interested in the full process of figuring things out. Or I'll just look at the source code. But in any case, we are doing a pretty solid job. We have a lot of content out, I think. I'm excited for what comes next. I'm excited for a trip into AR, actually, which is different, way different than what we've done so far. And that's part of the fun aspect of this channel, too. It's good stuff. The errors you run into are errors that everyone else runs into, absolutely. And I run into a fair share of errors. Today was smooth because, again, I have everything done in advance. I have notes here I can fall back on if I'm struggling to remember how things are. When things are completely implemented from scratch, it's completely bootstrapped and nothing is... I have no crutch. It's all, you're there with me. You have as much information as I have, so. Yeah, Bavik, the schedule needs to be rotated once. And the calendar does have some time zone issues, but I don't think I did rotate to the next day yet today, but I will do that as well. Is there another series of streams coming after the Exploring Digital Media streams? I'm not sure. That's a course that CS50 is producing formally, and I'm not sure if we have plans to do any new courses formally anytime soon. I'm sure in the future we will, but I'm not sure. I don't have the sort of lead on that. Thursday for slot machine. Oh, yeah, that is a problem. Yeah, it sucks because they had such a great widget. Twitch had such an awesome schedule widget that was reliable, and then they, for some reason, deleted all their widgets. And so now there's only that one widget, which seems to work really well for the United States, but it doesn't work well for people that are in other countries. Are you going to do a MongoDB video? Probably, yeah. Because I'm getting into web, and I know that part of that naturally is into like Mongo and NoSQL, I would probably imagine that we'll do a MongoDB video at some point in the future. Don't know when, because I'm learning React now, and I'm probably going to bake some React apps after we get past jQuery. We might do a semantic UI video, because I'm learning semantic UI as well. Since we have time, what did you have to code to get your job? I started off not coding here. I started off doing transcription and a bunch of random stuff. I was actually even doing video production. But over the course of time, I've helped out with a bunch of tools at CS50, and I do little one-off stuff. And the games course, I think, was the real thing that I made that I was actually pretty proud of from a programming perspective, having contributed to what CS50 has put out in terms of content. Because that actually required a substantial amount of work. A lot of the repos in the CS50 games course are like thousands of lines of code. And it was an undertaking. It was really good, though, really fun. I enjoyed the process. And it was a very good opportunity to sort of level up my abilities as a game programmer. Are there any previous streams, videos, content made by the producer doing the Spark AR stream? Offhand, I'm not too. He's contributed a lot of video stuff, but offhand, I'm not sure exactly which things he's played an active part in. I know that he was featured in a lecture, I think, one year for VR, but I'm not 100% sure. Colton, you wrote Check50, right, to correct code without having the TAs or the professors correct everyone's individual code. I did not write Check50. Who wrote Check50? Is Check50 public? Let me confirm this. Oops, not in this repository, in all of GitHub. Check50 is public. The contributors to Check50 are primarily... I did not contribute to Check50 now. Chad is the primary contributor alongside Brian and Yella, who is from the Netherlands, I believe. Kareem has also done some small contributions, and David has done some small contributions. But that is largely Chad, who did the functional programming stream, and Brian and Yella, it looks like. Brian, who did the object-oriented stream, Yella has not been on stream. I thought you were involved somehow. No, unfortunately, I haven't been involved with that. It's a cool project. I've been involved in bits and pieces of stuff. I did one of our old published 50 repos I implemented in Python, and that was a major part of our producers' workflow in terms of automating their the transcoding, their batch transcoding jobs. And that was a multi-threaded Python application, which was it wasn't terribly complex actually, but it was tricky because multi-threaded applications using the entirety of the resources of a Mac Pro, it was kind of a little overwhelming. This was years ago. This is when I was not very well versed in programming principles. I mean, I had been programming by like 6 or 7 years, so I knew my way around, but not super crazy. PDF to HTML. Oh, Render 50, I did contribute to parts of the old version of that, but David primarily did the new version. I think I did a slight amount of contributions to that. I don't entirely remember offhand. It's been a while. Been quite a while. Are we going to have a Unity VR stream at some point? There's nothing planned for that. That would be a bit of work. I'd probably have to use the encoding PC that we're using now to actually do it. You can't use Unity on Macs with VR. You can use Unity on Macs. You can't use VR on Macs with Unity. I think period, actually. Maybe there's a way to do it, but certainly not on MacBooks. But yeah, I think if I were to do a VR stream, we'd use the same PC or get a really bulky secondary PC that was outputting to the capture card on this other PC. The web language series goes HTML and Bootstrap, CSS, JS, jQuery, DB. Roughly, yeah. I would say that's a pretty natural progression. I would say you can even go beyond that. You could say jQuery into Flask, which Kareem did a video on, then into DB, then into like full stack development, maybe with React in a full stack context. And then you can do something like GraphQL, which I think adds a layer on top of querying your database, and like a lot of other technologies that are in vogue that I need to get up to speed with. WebAssembly, if you're doing front-end optimization, says Martin, absolutely. A lot of pretty bulky web apps are done with WebAssembly. Things like Unity gets compiled down to WebAssembly. The Love2D JS port gets compiled down to WebAssembly using mscriptin, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's good stuff. If anybody has any last questions, I think this is probably where we will end today's stream. Yes, WASM, please. That would be a stream. I don't know much about WebAssembly. I would need to dive into that quite a bit and see how I could make a project with it. But I know that it's very useful in a lot of contexts, trying to squeeze performance out of the web. My pleasure, Kaniz. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. One more final suggestion, just general design patterns. Sure. Design patterns are, a lot of it is domain specific. A big paradigm now is functional, and functional design goes along with React, especially because React and Redux are based upon a functional paradigm. So when we get into React and Redux, we might do a discussion on functional programming as it applies to modern web programming and how that's a design pattern now. And that applies to Clojure and ClojureScript, which I'm a fan of, and I want to get into Clojure and ClojureScript, and we can talk about it there too. What are your thoughts about Node.js for backend development over something like Flask? I don't have terribly strong feelings. I think they can both serve you well. Node is used a lot with React because NPM and React all sort of go in the same ecosystem. So I think use whatever, learn both of them maybe, and then use whichever one you enjoy working with more, but you can use them both. You would use Node with like Flask, for example, or you would use Node with like Express, and that would be the equivalent of using Flask, for example. Algorithms and data structures. Yeah, if I were going to do something like that myself, I need a lot of studying up to do, but Rodrigo has expressed a desire to do more of that. So we might see something more from him in that domain, algorithms and data structures. But I myself would like to see us do more of that as well. And then Asley says, thanks, Colton. Have a nice day. Thanks. Same to you, Asley. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. All right, cool. Sounds like we are largely set to go for the day. So thanks to everybody who tuned in for today's slot machine stream. I say it was pretty successful. Thanks again to my dad for the awesome art and the slot machine idea. We will see you all again on Friday with Connor for Spark AR, and then next week for jQuery and another CTF demonstration. So until then, enjoy the rest of your week. This is CS50 on Twitch. Have a wonderful rest of your day and stay safe.